I'll just wait for a minute as attendees are joining us. Good afternoon. Welcoming everyone to Virtual Thought Leadership, Top 5 Wind Trends Shaping the Wind Market in 2021. I'm Sangeeta Sridhar from Wind Insider, Asia's largest clean tech media firm. I would like to thank ABJ Drones for partnering along with us and MEC Intelligence for providing their advisory services. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Francis Jayasuriya, who is the Director India JWEC, for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, Wind Insider. The topic chosen today in today's webinar on the wind power trends, which is appropriate at the serving change. Since we find many behavior changes in the client, consumer trends across the industry, whether it's hospitality, travel, showroom visit, or automobile, not to forget our own wind industry as well, where the business is not going to be as usual, or it used to be. If one have closely observed during the global pandemic lockdown, the scenario one movement which has taken its own share was climate change and oil prices. Many social media covered this clear sky, freshness of their city, drop down in the pollution level. Not to forget our own Delhi has also projected this. Eventually, this one sets a clear message for a clean energy and its future. Many leading energy groups like IRENA, IEA, and GWEC echo the same voice since it's an opportunity which we can't be missed. There is a link between energy and information. We learn this to understand and express this information into technology. Since the information technology sets its own time frame, the same has been involved into new technologies like digitalization, AI, and cloud-based platform to manage the wind farm effectively. It's time to use these trends as a competitive advantage, integrate those catalyst opportunities in the market trends. We are so happy to see the RE sector in India is also moving towards a sustainable goal. The policymakers, the regulatory of federal and state are accepting the global practices in the wind sector and adapting to a new business model in India as well. So you can see in the recent RTC, RTM, wind and solar hybridization with a competitive price mechanism. My fellow panelists from MEC, IFC, Vestas, Emission, and Spring Energy, and KK Wind and APG will share their thoughts and views on market trends, innovative finance, supply chain, wind competitors with a new model, and not to forget the role of IPP with the hybridization and technology. This will keep engaged the participants in the next few hours, and I'm sure the speaker's thoughts and view will be heard across every sector and transform this opportunity into a new success story later these days. And thank you all once again for the opportunity. And I next hand over to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. With this, I would be quickly launching a poll to understand the category of audience we have today. I'll be closing the poll now.
I could not able to select it. I don't know, some issue.
Okay, so we have a mixed category of audience today. With this, I would now hand over the session to Mr. Siddharth Jain, who is the MD and founder of MEC. He would also be moderating today's webinar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sangeeta, uh, for the opportunity for inviting us here to present the trends in the market. And I welcome all the panelists and all the attendees today for the session. We are going to talk about a lot of the trends that are happening, impacting the wind industry today. And I look forward to an engaging session with all of you. If I just start with sharing my screen, just give me a second.
Yes, sir.
So I'll just start with a little bit of introduction of MEC. MEC is a consulting firm which is focused on the wind and renewable sector. And we have been working in the wind and renewable sector for the last 10 years now. And we have an office in India and Denmark, where we have supported OEMs, developers, IPPs, as well as a number of supply chain players looking into new market opportunities, developing technology and product roadmaps. And in doing that, we get a very deep understanding of the regulations, the economies, as well as what are the competitive trends that are impacting the market. And based on a lot of those insights, we have prepared the following presentation for you. So if we start with the first slide here, this is about the total forecast for India and how it has been developing in the past. So the targets in India primarily come top down from the government of India, and there is a big shift in the mindset of government where renewables have started to come across as the major capacity installed capacity base for India going forward from what was earlier coal. So we expect to install around 350 gigawatt of renewables by 2030, and out of which the share of wind would be around 140 gigawatt. Right now we are at 38 to 40 gigawatt total installed capacity. So this means that around 10 gigawatt per year needs to be installed as per the targets that have been outlined by the government. In the past 10 years, we had seen a consistent ramp up of renewable energy capacity from around 2 gigawatt on average in 2011-12 to going up to 5.5 gigawatt of annual installation in 2017. And then after that, we saw a drop in installed base into again going back to 2 gigawatt average. But at the same time, the pipeline of 8.6 gigawatt being there in the market. So there are very big ambitions, and the market was going up, and this went into a little bit period of low installation, but still there is a large pipeline coming in. And this is primarily driven by the reduction in the cost that wind has seen. So almost costs have dropped by 50% in the last 3 to 4 years, which has given a lot of confidence to a large number of stakeholders to both explore India as a market and to grow the installed base. But what stalled this market in the last 2 years, 3 years? So we see that there are 5 major challenges. First one we see is that there is a delay in signing of power purchase agreements between SECI and the states which are to offtake power. The second inhibitor is that there are payment delays by DISCOMs, which makes it very difficult for state-related demand to pick up. Third, we have seen the challenge that there was change in land allocation policies and approvals in some of the states where the largest installations were expected to happen. The fourth challenge that came in the last 2-3 years was that grid infrastructure got severely challenged in terms of the capacity it could evacuate. In India, we have a large number of substations, but because of wind resource quality, only a few of them were the center of all bids, which meant that the capacity that was available and those evacuation infrastructure was not sufficient for all the bids that came in. And since that infrastructure takes its own time to construct, so there was some delay, which means that the pipeline is still there, but the installations have been lower. And then we completely lack a corporate PPA market. And although if you look at the US market, where corporate PPAs are one of the major drivers of volumes, in India, that is not there. And in the last 6 months to 9 months, government has kind of taken cognizance of all these challenges and have stepped in to provide a lot of mitigation mechanisms. For delay in signing of power purchase agreements, government has said that they would want to make mandatory alignment of states' renewable purchase obligations to the national RPOs. Right now, the national RPOs are at one level, the state RPOs are at a different level, but what is finally budgeted for is at a different level. So the government wants all of these three to be aligned. And if you look at the recent news report, the minister has also indicated that there would be a penalty of around 1 rupee per unit for non-RPO compliance. So there is a lot of cognizance of this fact, and some steps are being taken. Plus, there is talk of allowing bulk C&I consumers to buy directly from SECI tenders. Then, in terms of payment delays, process has been defined for clearing payments in a time-bound manner and mandatory signing of letter of credit. And tripartite agreement with RBI is signed, but it has not been exercised, but might be exercised going forward to make sure that the payments are adhered to, and the developers are able to take the risk of project installation. In terms of local change in land policy, the government has removed some price caps, which were leading to concentration of capacity in certain substations. Now, hopefully, that will be removed, and the increased land costs could be allowed. So we will see some development and changes happening, and easier execution. Then grid infrastructure, again, price caps will help in moving to a different grid point. And new substations have been outlined in Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. And wind park has been announced, which would take care of some of these issues. Then in corporate PPA market, there is a medium-term solution to have only C&I off-taker targets, like what we have right now with the off-takers, which are utilities. There is some discussion where going on to have exclusively C&I renewable energy targets for utility scale projects. And then if you look at the recent announcements made by the Finance Ministry, where they wanted to transform the DISCOMs and remove the arbitrary charges of cross subsidy and additional surcharge and introduce direct benefit transfer, that could also be a big boost towards opening up the corporate PPA market. So in the short-term challenges that we have seen in the last 2 to 3 years, government has in the last 6 to 9 months, especially before the COVID crisis, had taken cognizance of this and announced a lot of steps. But apart from this, in the long term, there are some challenges as per how the state utilities actually budget their demand for renewable energy, and whether that will be sufficient to give profitability to projects. But I think as the new tender designs are coming up and we see a shift in that, so that problem will probably also get solved. In the forecasting, if you move from what has happened in the past in terms of to what is likely to happen in the future, we expected even before COVID or before even the announcements that were made by the government, that India would miss the 60 gigawatt target. And in the best case scenario, we were estimating that 54 gigawatt of total installed base will be reached by 2022. And in the realistic scenario, India were to reach 50 gigawatt of total installed capacity limit. But because of COVID, we expect that the total installed capacity will be further lower. It would probably be more towards the 48 gigawatt we had in the lower scenario in our model. And we expect 2 gigawatt of tenders which are in the pipeline might get cancelled, and around a gigawatt of tenders might not come up, which we were expecting to come up from some state utilities and DISCOMs will not come up. So in a nutshell, because of those cancellations that could be there in the existing pipeline and in the new tenders, we see the most likely number of installed capacity to be 48 gigawatt by 2022. Then if we notice what has been happening in the recent past in parallel, apart from these plain vanilla tenders, there is a shift in terms of the overall tender design, where hybrid tenders have become recently very important. In terms of the total announced and awarded tenders, we see that the Standalone wind tenders are around 8.6 gigawatt, and the tenders with system planning or hybrid element to be around 3.9 gigawatt. But in terms of what is notified, this is completely the opposite. Only 2 gigawatt of tenders are purely wind, and around 11.4 gigawatt of tenders are for hybrid or round the clock or peak power or blending of renewable energy with coal. So with this shift, players need to think not only from how they can be competitive in the pure wind tenders and to compete with solar in order to increase the volume going forward, but also to think how to complement with solar and think about system design, capabilities to win future orders. So what we see is that, the mindset earlier in the market was that whether the demand is coming from federal, state, C&I, and PSU, and depending upon that, you would structure your financing and develop the project. But going forward, we see that rather than having demand-centric planning, the focus has to move towards technology competitiveness, where how do you work with other technologies and installed base, and how do you offer with a certain characteristics rather than standalone specific wind or solar. That would become very important. Then understanding the system level need, what player is sitting at what APPC, what other retirements are being faced, how the grid will be stabilized, what can be sold into DISCOMs and IEX, what could be sold in bilateral agreements. So a very deep understanding of the customers and their needs at a system level would be essential for the new scenarios. And then the third is to put business model and financial engineering at the center of the discussion, because now with all these uncertainties coming up in terms of cash flows and multiple options coming up, so how do you bring in equity investors at different point in times? How do you refinance debt? What stage do investors now enter? Because the certainty would come at a certain point in time, and what time do you exit? So all these parameters will become even more important, which means that the wave of consolidation that was happening in the market earlier would continue to happen, because not only is the demand changing, as we have seen in the previous slide, and we see in the plain vanilla tenders that the demand is moving towards a different type of model, but also we see new capabilities to be needed. If we continue on the trend of forward-looking installations, we see that the demand for financing is likely to go up significantly. And India needs at least $300 billion to finance its renewable energy targets towards 2030. But what we have seen is that the source of funding, has been very restricted, coming from very small number of players. And we still do not have very deep financial markets where funds which are investing into, let's say, international equity and debts, or retail investors, high net worth investors are able to participate in both corporate and project related financing. So if you look at this slide, the first column is basically debt and equity, the two kind of financing that is required in a project, and what are the different types of financing instruments that are there. So there are loans, there are bonds, there are mezzanine or convertible covenants. Then you have equity participation, where you purchase equity, or you securitize the assets and you sell it out. So these are the 5 broad instruments, and there are around 7 to 8 main funding sources. If you look at the funding sources, most of them are red in India, because the market is still not developed so much as to take the funding from retail level or low cost funding towards this project, which means that the cost will be higher for some of these renewable projects. What has changed is that banks and NBFCs, which were primarily funding the renewable energy industry in India, and were getting more and more comfortable with better debt to equity ratios, with giving some limited recourse to projects and providing some stable interest rates and average tenures which were higher than the public sector banks. They have faced a lot of challenge because of the IL&FS crisis and the overall increase and deterioration of NPAs that are happening in this sector. So we see that Only a handful of banks and NBFCs are right now in the market who are lending. And that has made the offshore related financing for debt seem to be becoming more and more popular. And although the costs are almost same or even a bit higher for taking money from offshore funds and putting them as debt in the projects, but since they are available and a large number of players are seeking out the offshore international debt, so we see that this is right now where everybody's trying, apart from the banks and NBFCs who are currently lending. Bonds, we see that corporate bonds are not very much available for companies which are not rated high credit rating wise, and because of discount risks, there are very limited ways to raise corporate bonds. Green bonds also, for the same reason, are restricted to very few of the large players in the market who especially have big promoter backing. And that means that the smaller players in the market are almost facing a big fund crunch. Mezzanine funds are expensive, and there is a lot of funds who want to give the money, but off-takers are unable to compete with those kind of costs for the low tariffs that emerge in the market. So that sector is also drying out. We see a lot of private equity investment in public and infrastructure projects, which are renewable energy, but because they have a certain time period in which the funds have to be closed and there are certain return expectations, we see a lot of challenges when you go for refinancing to some of these private equity funds, that they are not very much forthcoming in increasing the financing of projects. So the promoters are looking at raising finance from new investors. And then we simply do not have any yieldco or InvIT which is successful. There have been attempts which were made to do some yieldco and InvIT in the foreign markets, but the costs were prohibitive and still nothing has materialized. Only recently we have seen some funds coming in this direction. So overall, the focus on the funds will remain a big challenge. In terms of technology, India has 50 gigawatt of resource, which is giving CUF of 35% plus. In order to go further, we need to get new technology in the market. Secondly, we have limited grid infrastructure, as I explained earlier, and then there is head-on competition with solar. So overall, to reduce the cost, new technology, better turbines are required. We see, however, in the order book, most of the orders are for 2 megawatt platform, and 3 megawatt platform is only offered by Nordex, and Inox has gotten an LOI. But going forward, we expect that this should come up, and the OEMs need to overcome the dilemma as to how they would want to measure their investments versus the return that they will get from the order book. In terms of localization, we see 85% of the turbine cost already localized in India. Some raw material from this 85% plus generators and electronics are not yet localized. We expect that more and more, in light of the Atmanirbhar campaign and the government's focus on reducing duties and making India an export hub, this should start to come into India. We have also seen localization happening from announcements for companies such as Vestas, who want to set up a base in India for their entire market, global market. So this is expected to go up. And today we will have a discussion on all of these trends with our panelists who have joined us from different companies. So Sangeeta, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for those insights. Moving ahead, I would now like to invite Ms. Niharika, who is a Global Director, ABJ Drones. She would be having a presentation. Over to you. Hello, Ms. Niharika, are you there with us?
Yeah, hello. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Sangeeta. I'll just share my screen with you all. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Niharika Kolte, And just to give you a brief introduction about myself, I started my career in the renewable transaction space as part of the corporate finance team at PwC and KPMG. I'm currently working with ABJ Drones as the global director, where I'm largely responsible for the business development. I'm currently heading the Asia Pacific region. Today, I'm here to talk to you about how you can increase profitability in the wind energy sector by simply deploying the right technology. By the end of 15 minutes, you will be convinced to make the shift from traditional methods of inspection to a drone-based AI and ML-driven inspection. Now, all of us here know that the life of a wind turbine can be precarious. The blades, which are made of laminated materials, can reach speeds up to 180 miles per hour at the tip, which means that even smallest particles in the air can cause damage to the surfaces. It's probably no surprise that a lightning strike is a serious hazard for wind turbines. Damaged blades will significantly decrease the lifespan of the wind turbine and cause huge performance losses. We know that many wind turbines are now more than 20 years old, which means that there is an increased probability of serious accidents. In fact, we are already seeing a few cases of that. Conventionally, the inspection of blades by service technicians hanging on ropes or operating from cherry pickers to conduct visual inspection. Sometimes they literally just, tap on the blades to use sound vibration in an attempt to determine some internal issues. Now, these procedures are not only time consuming and expensive, but they're also very unreliable. To add to that, you will also have to shut down your operations for about 3 to 4 days to carry out the wind turbine inspection and also deploy at least 6 to 8 people for the same. Now, despite putting in so much of effort for physical optical inspection, internal blade damages still go undetected, which in turn will lead to a loss of productivity, let alone safety issues and downtime. Now, considering all of these factors, IPPs in Europe spend around 30,000 euros overall for conducting one inspection and still don't get quality data and actionable insights. Now, the industry has slowly begun to adopt drone technology by utilizing optical payload systems as an alternative to physical inspections. Now, while that has improved your speed and reduced costs at some level, optical imagery still fails to overcome the main issue of inspection, which is the need to inspect the internal structure of turbines. We see that a few operators have begun to use land-based thermal systems in an attempt to obtain the internal structure imagery of the turbines. Now, while this is definitely a step forward in the inspection techniques, there are significant limitations to this as well. For thermal imagery to achieve maximum benefit, the images need to be captured at a specific angle to the blade, and the sensors need to be within close proximity to the turbine. Now, due to the size of the turbines, neither of these requirements can be met. Thus, whatever results are gained from using land-based systems are still limited at best. This is where companies like ABJ make things not only simpler and safer, but also get you high-quality, actionable data. Just to give you a brief about who we are, at ABJ Drones, we specialize in drone-based inspections. Now, while we're able to cater to industries such as power line, real estate, mining, our main focus is on renewable energy. We have two proprietary solutions, WindView and SolarView. We have a presence in about 37 countries, and we have a strong pilot network of about 2,000 pilots all over the world. We've been fortunate enough to work with the industry leaders such as Siemens Gamesa, Renew, Vestas, and DNVGL, to name a few. Let me quickly walk you through the WindView system. You can see on the slide that there are 3 key elements for inspection: drones, sensors, and a data processing system. However, we need to understand that hardware constitutes only about 10% of the offering. Now, the differentiating factor, which will be instrumental in getting you meaningful insights, really lies in the other elements, such as piloting techniques, position of the wind turbine during inspection, and recommendations that are put forward by our blade experts. ABJ has done extensive research for about 4 years and has IP for thermal sensors, flight path techniques, and positioning of the wind turbine. Now, the drones that we use to carry out these inspections are built to withstand high wind speeds up to around 15 meters per second. with demonstrated inspection time per turbine of around just 30 to 45 minutes, we are able to not only capture 99% of the defects, but we are also able to reduce the man hours and turbine downtime by over 75%. The extensive imagery that is captured is then sent to ABJ specialist data labs, where the images are organized and examined. The findings are then annotated by in-house engineers and blade experts, who will then put forth a recommendation to remedy the issues. Here now, let me come to the crux of my presentation. Let me help you understand what kind of damages we're able to discover. So what is it that we can help you find? We can go up to 15 centimeters deep into the blade and find out defects as small as 3 millimeters using our thermal sensors. Now, if you look at this optical image, all you will see is a dot on the surface of the blade. However, when you look at the thermal image alongside, you will see the depth of the wound, which has caused a major internal damage to the blade. In the second image, a turbine engineer forgot some metal objects inside the blade while conducting some routine inspection. We were able to detect these substructural defects in a non-destructive manner by simply using thermal sensors and a drone. We're able to take condition reporting to the next level by finding out issues such as delamination, bad bonding, and lightning strike damages. A class 5 damage such as a lightning strike at the blade tip can lead to 6 to 8% efficiency losses and about a 500% increase in failure rate, while a class 3 damage such as a trailing edge split can lead up to 3 to 6% efficiency loss. With regular drone inspections, you will be able to compare assets across your portfolio. You will be able to track the performance of wind turbines over time, and most importantly, you will be able to contrast blade manufacturers with the history of damages. We are also able to evaluate the existing repairs and monitor the repair effectiveness over time. We conduct volumetric analysis to analyze the volume of pad bonding. Over here, you can see that the blade is only a 39% well bonded. In addition to that, we take all of the images that are captured are stitched together so that we're able to identify the exact location of the defect meter by meter. Our inspection deliverables include 3 things. One is high resolution imagery, which is mapped to each blade. Second is all defects are basically classified type-wise and by severity level. And then we also have an online portal where we store and sort your inspection data. Now, what hugely differentiates us from competition is our extensive database of known issues and predictive patterns for all kinds of blades. Like I said earlier, we've worked in about 37 countries with the industry leaders. So we are able to give users an insight into the possible range of problems and issues that could be encountered on a specific type of a blade. We can also help you identify when a particular problem is likely to appear in the life cycle of your WTG. Now, this knowledge repository will enable a more effective and a more targeted approach for the inspection process, which will save you hundreds of man hours and drive huge efficiencies in the maintenance cycle and costs. Let me quickly walk you through some of our select case studies. We've worked extensively with LM Wind, GE, Siemens Gamesa, and Vestas. With LM Wind, we were responsible for finding out the displaced balancing material in the blade. And we were also supposed to inspect whether it is well bonded or not. For GE, we did a thorough inspection of the new turbines, basically like an audit, to figure out the quality and effectiveness of their WTG. For Siemens Gamesa, we've done a lot of work, some of which is doing the volumetric analysis, scaling, and finding the percentage of bonding per meter. For Vestas, this was an interesting case. We were asked to deploy WindView technology to find both internal and external problems during harsh winters in Canada. Now, here the objective was to understand the effectiveness of WindView and our thermal sensors in different temperatures and climates. We have the capability to increase the efficiency of your asset. As you can see on the slide, the estimated savings achievable with drone-based inspections are about 50%. And finally, We live in times of austerity, and really being able to better assign budgets would definitely have a positive impact on the industry, allowing for a financially stronger company. Drone inspections have no requirement to touch, to climb, or to put anybody in danger. So a particular asset can really remain live while the drone inspections are taking place. So this kind of eradicates the site shutdown as well. A thermal survey generally requires that a particular asset assumes its normal working conditions so that we are able to capture any abnormal heat signatures if found. An offline asset, on the other hand, would never allow you to capture this kind of data. The cost differential is also beneficial to the company because now you no longer need to hire a team of rope access technicians or erect a scaffold surrounding the offline asset, or possibly a crane and crew, to reach certain areas of that turbine. All of the above costs are completely eradicated with any UAV inspection. The combination of this cost efficiency and the reduction in safety concern should alone be enough for any company to adopt this technology. With all pun intended, sky is the limit for drone-based inspections. There are many foreseeable applications of drones in this space, and I think at this point, we're only scratching the surface. Please feel free to reach out to me should you be interested in deploying drones to inspect your assets. We will be happy to take up your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much for joining us today. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you. Over to you, Sangeeta.
Thank you very much, Ms. Niharika. Now, I would like to hand over the session to Mr. Siddharth Jain to take it forward as he's moderating today's webinar.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Today we have with us Ms. Pratibha Bajaj from IFC, who is here to talk about the impact of financial crisis on the equity debt ratios and how the need is there for innovative financing going forward. Welcome, Pratibha.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this webinar. Can I share my screen?
Pratibha, I think if you can just give a little bit of introduction about yourself, then we can start.
Sure. So I've been working at IFC for the last 8 years. I'm mostly looking at renewable energy financing. So I'm part of the IFC infrastructure team based out of New Delhi. So IFC is a private sector arm of the World Bank Group and has been a pioneer in renewable energy financing in India.
Great, thank you. We have a small poll, Pratibha, before we launch the presentation, just to understand, what is audience thinking. Sangeeta, could you just launch the poll, please? So the question is on a scale of 1 to 4, with 4 being the highest, what do you think is the difficulty renewable energy projects are facing in India for financing? So if you could just rate it on the scale of 1 to 4. The poll is for 5 seconds and the time starts now. Sangeeta, can you close the poll? Okay, so we see that most of the people think that it's a big problem, and Pratibha, your comments here would be very helpful. Thank you. Over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, great. So today I wanted to talk a bit about IFC first, and then we can go on to what is the state of RE financing in India today and what are the key challenges we as financiers are also facing due to sectoral headwind. So IFC, as I mentioned, is private sector arm of the World Bank Group. We also have other arms of World Bank Group. IBRD directly lends to governments. IDA is our subsidized arm which lends to poorer countries. MIGA is our insurance arm, and then there is also a Center for Arbitration, which is a non-investment arm of the World Bank Group. So what does IFC offer? We are capable of investing across the capital structure. So the question is timely regarding what are we thinking about RE financing today in India. Not only do we do like all kinds of loans and equity, we also offer derivatives, commodity finance, syndication, and blended finance. Blended finance is actually very subsidized level of financing for innovative products and mostly is used for poorer countries. And we've seen very few blended finance projects in India. This is IFC's energy practice. We have done almost $4 billion, $3.5 to $4 billion every year. So legacy, we have some legacy portfolio in thermal. Most of it is gas. We don't do coal. And if you look at the overall global portfolio, 50% of it is renewables, adding up solar, wind, biomass, and hydro. So now coming to what's the current situation and COVID impact. So of course, at the initial start of the lockdown period in India, we were very much concerned. There was a drop in power demand by almost 20-25%. And the question was, if the DISCOMs lose some of their most well-paying customers in terms of industrial and commercial customers, how are they going to survive? Thankfully, the lockdown have been lifted and now the power demand is back to its original. The other thing we've noticed in India is a very supportive government. MNRE came out with timely notifications to the DISCOMs to, make payments on time, to not give priority for renewable power for scheduling, and also making sure that anything, if you are curtailing, if the DISCOMs resort to curtailing power, then they're supposed to pay for deemed generation. However, we do see the COVID impact in the next 2 years. We see the supply of RE power is going to come down because projects are going to get delayed. And in general, given the way the industry outlook is, we do see lesser number of projects coming up in the next couple of years. The key concerns which, today when we're looking at financing in India in RE, especially post-COVID, of course, the number one concern is DISCOMs and their payment cycle. Irrespective of whether the project is, backed by SECI, NTPC, we still think this is a risk, ongoing risk, and we need to monitor it very closely. Thankfully, government has come out with a liquidity scheme, but the success of that, we are still evaluating how is this being implemented, how many state governments are going to come out and give guarantees so that DISCOM can take benefit of the, the package being offered by the government. The other issues we see, on the projects which are, under construction, yes, there has been a major challenge. Labor mobilization is going to become a big issue. So even if, lockdown has been lifted and power was always categorized as an essential sector, it still remains to be seen because of migrant labor. Labor is not readily available, and to get back to full schedule of construction will take some time for the RE sector. The other big uncertainty we are seeing, maybe it's not so much applicable to the wind sector, but for the solar sector, is when the duty would be imposed and how will it be financed. While we do believe, when the government has announced and there is very clear understanding that change in law, under the change in law clause, developers would get benefit and would be compensated. But the fact remains they have to look for more financing, and it will again be financed, you have to finance for both debt and equity. So, the developers still find a challenge, after starting the project, you still have to raise more finances, and then it puts additional strain on their balance sheet as well. The other challenge we had seen, this has been going on for quite some time, and due to COVID, we were expecting it to worsen, but thankfully it hasn't been as bad, was curtailment. And MNRE's timely announcements may be, credited to have had some impact. We haven't seen as much curtailment as we were expecting in the beginning of the lockdown. The other things which continue to plague the sector are, of course, tariffs and litigation. In the beginning, 2-3 years ago, we were thinking this would get resolved, but now with seeing this long history as a financier, it has, become imperative to actually crystallize the impact on it. If you're taking into account equity investments, then you would take a haircut because of these issues. Or as a debt investor, you are again going to provide for, higher debt service coverage ratios to care about, all the issues which would come up, be it tariff issues, be it, additional levy of charges by some southern states, etc., for open access PPAs, group captive PPAs. So overall, the leverage is going to go down. I know the sector had been relying on higher leverage to boost their equity returns, but now as lenders would also, look at all the ongoing challenges and try and size debt for projects more conservatively. So what this would do is actually reduce the return on equity for developers. And then on the other side, on the equity financier side, you are looking at reduced returns and then all the risks which continue to stay and plague the sector, compared to some of the other projects you could finance in infrastructure where such kind of uncertainties are not there and the returns are comparable. So the overall viability concerns do start coming up, and unless and until there is significant steps taken to mitigate many of these risks which I mentioned, it does create issues for considering new financing in the sector. The other things that you also mentioned earlier in your call about alternative mode of financing. We've seen as international lenders and also equity investors, we have seen many private sector banks which were very active in RE lending are no longer considering lending, RE sector. And then the government sector banks are already stressed. So there are very few public sector banks which are considering RE financing in the initial stages. Government has provided directions to PFC, REC, IREDA, so we do hope they will take a lot of financing going forward, rather bulk of the financing going forward. But then the problem remains for any new for any new project which is coming up. They require a lot more efficiency of what a private sector bank can offer. So we are seeing those problems in many greenfield projects which we look at. And of course, international banks are very keen, but the problem with international lending, not a DFI like IFC, which can offer 18, 20-year loans.
Yes.
We see that they can only do 5 or 7-year loans.
Yes.
And then there are like additional refinancing risks you are taking for a project which is already plagued with so many uncertainties, right? So that has also become a challenge. And then there are additional concerns on Forex, what kind of swaps you are using.
Yes.
And then, because there is so much stress on returns, developers are trying to, I would say, making sure that they get the most out of everything and trying to cut fine and building up risks which will ultimately play out later.
Yes,
so,
yes, that's something is to be seen. And I think you mentioned it quite nicely, the way also the Odyssey is seeing that right now the challenges are there and will continue to be there, and we need to broaden our financial structures. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I think we'll take up the questions on the question and answer.
Sure.
I hope it's okay.
Sure. I was actually coming to my last slide anyway. I was just wanted to close with some positive note and not just negative things. So I wanted to say there are some green shoots in the sector. We are looking at financing hybrid projects, and with round the clock auction, we think we will have a much larger role to play going forward. And we're beginning to see some effort by the government of India to develop offshore wind as well. And that's something we are very keen to finance. We are looking at it globally. And even in India, we would want to, consider projects as and when they come up in offshore wind sector. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the nice and comprehensive presentation. I think it covered a lot of points that is on top of everybody's mind.
Yeah.
So now we have Mr. Amar Variava from Vestas. And he's here to talk about, the recent trend that is about localizing in India and how the government is also now pushing towards Atmanirbharta and becoming vocal for local. So, and Vestas has announced, a lot of investments into India over the last few years. So it is really nice to have Mr. Amar with us. and he can talk about how he sees this entire localization and his experience in the market. So welcome, Mr. Amar.
Thank you, Siddharth. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, and before I share my views, I just hope that all of you who are there in this webinar and their family members, their relatives are safe and well in this unprecedented times. Well, with that note, I would just like to talk about
Amar, just a second. Amar, just a second. We have a poll just to know how the audience thinks
Sure.
about the question of localization. So just give us. So the question is, to what extent can Asia develop as a wind export hub for Southeast Asian markets? And there are three options. It is the way forward. There's nothing that's going to stop it. It is unlikely or can't say. The poll starts now. So you have 5 seconds. Sangeeta, can you close the poll? Okay. So Amar, a lot of support coming from from all the audience in localization. So very keen to hear your views. Thank you.
Good. I think that will help me to also channelize the thought process here. So I was talking about wind in India is already around 70 to 75% make in India. If you see, most of the OEMs have their own setup for blade manufacturing and for many other things. In fact, this sector has completed around 30 years in the country, has around more than 5,000 MSMEs, around 2 million jobs they have created. So I think the sector is pretty matured, and these jobs have been created over the years in OEMs, in MSMEs, in IPPs, developers, etc. So sector is quite matured compared to the other sources of renewable energy. However, as you say that on 23rd of June, this month, the Honorable Minister has scheduled a meeting, and many of us were there in that particular meeting. It was a video conference, wherein Minister actually, discussed ways and means to ensure the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. And then he put more stress on the Make in India initiative. In fact, he urged 3 pledges to all the RE players, and I'll just read out those pledges because it will also help us where actually ministry is heading us to and where rest of the industry is. So the first one was not to import any equipment, materials, goods in respect of which there is sufficient domestic capacity. The second was that in respect of goods and services wherein the domestic capacity is not available and that import is inevitable, then it should be allowed for only for a fixed time frame of 2-3 years, during which the indigenous manufacturing of these items would be developed by an enabling policy, tax incentives, startups, vendor development, R&D support, and so on and so forth. And third was also very important that in the respect of the equipment items required to be imported from prior reference countries shall be done only after obtaining the prior approval from Ministry of Power, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Now, apart from that, he also spoke about a couple of more points, which is very interesting for us to understand and discuss. So number one, that, he actually talked about the financing from PFC, REC, IREDA will be structured in such a manner that the lower rate of interest will be charged on those developers who will be domestically manufacturing the equipments. And then he also said that the power is a strategic sector, also a critical infrastructure for the development of the country. And the government is open to consider the increase in tariff is necessary. Now, this is very, very important point. When we are talking about local content, localization, it has a direct, the relationship on the tariff or the cost of the machines. And he's actually showing some kind of positive, way to move forward in that direction. Now let's talk about what is going to happen. Vestas, as you know, I actually talk about OEM as well as the MSME today. And then if I talk only about Vestas today, so we have been heavily investing in this country. We have opened our first factory under Make in India initiative in 2017 in Ahmedabad for our blade. And second Make in India project we have initiated in September last year in Tamil Nadu, which is again expanding our footprint and the manufacturing capacity.
Amar, we have lost you. Are you there? Hi, Amar.
I believe we have lost him. I suppose there's some connectivity issue from his
Yes,
end.
I think so as well. So I think we can
move ahead with the next speaker meanwhile.
Yes.
do some kind of manufacturing activity. So if you see, in last week of February, we did one day-long workshop in collaboration with Invest India, wherein we invited our global suppliers and we asked them to, invest in India, why they should come and invest in India, what is that market is offering in the long run, in the short run, and so on and so forth. And then a lot of global suppliers are also now willing to, bring FDI, bring the manufacturing facility here, or create jobs, and then finally skill set. But then in this entire process, few questions or few observations are there. Actually, we all need to ponder upon them. And first and foremost is the annual wind energy volume. If you see that, I strongly believe that the local content in the market is entirely driven by the level of domestic volume. Everybody would like to come to India primarily to serve the Indian market, to domestic market. And if the volume is remaining after serving the market, then probably think about the export. So I think now last 3 years scenario, if you see, we have witnessed the first auction in February 2017, and then around 13 gigawatt of wind capacity has been concluded. But on the ground, only 2 gigawatt of capacity came forward. Now this number is very scary, and in fact, most of the global investors, whether it's OEM or component manufacturers, they always would like to see the at least 5 gigawatt of year-on-year commissioning volume. And
Yes.
if this happens, then I can bet you, Siddharth, no boardroom will be thinking twice to come and invest in India. They will always be very positive and very bullish about Indian market. But then this is not happening for last 3 years. If you see last 3 years volume, it is not even 6 gigawatt, the combined volume. And
Yes.
that's why most of the players are a little hesitant. They are actually sitting on fence and they're thinking whether to come now or just wait and watch, kind of a situation.
Yes, and I think that's
Also-
also where the 3 megawatt question comes in.
Yeah, see, the challenge is not about machine. Challenge is about the some of the tactical issues that we are facing in terms of land and the evacuation permissions and all. If we can see around 5 gigawatt of volume year on year, I'm sure the machine upgradation and most of the other things can be done. We have today 10 gigawatt of capacity, putting all OEM together. But if you see only 2 gigawatt of companies
Yes.
utilized, that means 80% is not utilized. And then
Yes.
we have a factory, we have people, we have to pay the salary and so on and so forth.
No,
So
I
this
agree.
is little tricky. Again, like I would say, the many countries who have implemented a very, very strict local content, the rule, they have gone ahead very aggressively on the local content. And what has happened in those countries, that eventually it has become counterproductive. So we have to strike a very, very strong balance in the local content as well as the other
Got
way.
it.
And then what happens is that the product becomes more expensive. Then lack of competitiveness also happens sometimes. This is what exactly happened in Brazil. And then finally, what happened?
That's a big dilemma. Aman, I'm sorry, but we're running out of time, and maybe we can take this forward in the Q&A session if that is okay.
Well, I have a hard stop, so I will just like to put just last one point is that the important we also need to understand that government was talking about withdrawing some of the important the benefits like the CCDC and all. If this happens, then it will be a very big issue with the wind sector. And then last but not the least is that some of the materials like balsa wood, which we use for our blade, it doesn't happen. It doesn't grow. Balsa doesn't grow in India, so we have to be very, very guarded with our approach, that what we are going to be produce here in India and what we'll be importing from outside. So there has to be a very fine balance need to be maintained here. Thank you.
So you're saying that volume as well as what is available, they need to both work together for local content to really work, and we should not make it counterproductive, the policies.
Absolutely.
Got it. Very good point. So thank you, Amar, for that. And now I have with us Mr. Gopan, who is Head of Product and International Solutions at Envision Energy. And he'll be taking forward this discussion on the technological aspect and whether 3 megawatt product is required in India and what kind of competitiveness it can bring. So Mr. Gopan, are you here?
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth.
Great. Can you switch on the camera, please?
It just says that you cannot start.
Okay, no problem. Then I think we'll start continue like that. So we have the poll also here, audience. So the question is, how critical is launch of 3 megawatt for ensuring competitiveness of wind in India? Could you give your vote, please? Time starts now. Yeah, Sangeeta, can you close the poll? Okay, so most of the audience is 50-50, you know how much it is, but Mr. Gopan, we look forward to your views. So maybe you can give a little bit of an introduction and then we can go into this question.
Yeah, so very good afternoon to everyone in the call. And I am Gopan. I am head of product and solution in Envision. As you know that Envision has started in this market just a few years back as a new entrant. But luckily we had a good two project, one from Spring and one from Renew. And we could able to execute it close to 235 megawatt out of the 13 gigawatt auction, at least in the 2 gigawatt what we have in that 235 at least comes from Envision. And we sell EN 131 2.5 megawatt machine with 131 rotor diameter with a hub height of 120. So that's a little brief, and then we are Envision also looking for to bring the 3 megawatt. But before getting into the 3 megawatt, just wanted to say that technology is very much important, and whatever we see that wind has matured quite a lot in terms of technology, and the turbines which comes now, it's very efficient and have a good performance. We see the good improvement in the AEP, and we have the very good reliability also. Nowadays, these turbines are designed not only for the design life of 20 years, but it should last even for 25 years because the PPAs are also signed for 25 years. So that is a good part. 25 years, the design should work. That is a challenge, but then a lot of R&D activities and innovative technologies are put into that, and we see that the performance of the turbines are improving, and the design is also cost competitive, and we see that the reliability is also keep on improving. And we see that to improve the reliability, a lot of testing, and then as you know, the certification, when we do the certifications are also becoming very stringent, and that also helps us to bring up to a very competitive turbine by reducing the loads, having a smart controls which helps to reduce the loads, as well as we can have a site specific turbine controller which can actually extract more energy from the wind and produce a higher AEP level. So these are the advantages and technologies, and we see that for the across the world, if you see the market is moving towards the 3 megawatt. If you see in Europe and all, already they have moved. Last 4-5 years, more installation has happened in the 3 megawatt level. And here in India, last 5 to 6 years, if you see, it was 2 megawatt platform, mainly 2.1 megawatt, 2.3 megawatt, and 2.5, 2.7. But as you also said, Siddharth, that Nordex is selling the 3 megawatt here. But if you see all the OEMs, they have the product 3 megawatt, 3.2, 3.5. But as Amar was also mentioning, that we should be invited here to bring that product because that is very much important. The OEM should feel that, oh, yeah, this is a market for 3 megawatt. Definitely the market will move to 3 megawatt, and then we are seeing it will happen. You will see that from 2021 onwards, more installation will be on the 2.7 or 3, 3.2, like that it will be happening. Generally 4 to 5 years, these turbines will be there, and then again we need to think of maybe 3.5 plus. It
So
will happen.
what would change when 3 megawatt comes, and how soon do you expect them to come?
In general, if you ask me now, why the 3 megawatt? Because see that as somebody was also mentioning, land is a critical thing. Land, BOP, all these things are the cost is increasing. So we need to see that we with higher megawatt machines definitely will produce per turbine side. If you see, the energy production is better.
So the
But
cost will go down. So right now it's
cost,
2.9. So it will be 2.5. Do you expect?
yes, yeah. Cost will go down because the scale of economics of scale will really help us actually here. So
Got
that really helps actually.
And what's the volume that should be there per year for you to kind of get to 3 megawatt, or 3 megawatt will come right now, looking at what is the market? Or do you expect that if the volume is 4 gigawatt per year, then only 3 megawatt will come?
No, volume is very much required because
Okay.
unless until somebody else also say unless until volume is there, you can't go the localization, and then you don't have a cost-effective turbine. Like we all the time speak about the offshore turbine, it never comes to because it is 2.5 times cost more than the
Yes.
onshore turbine.
Got it.
So we should have that here, but definitely the PLF is better, but cost you can't manage here.
Got it. Got it. Thank you, Mr. Gopan. Thank you for the comments. Now I'll move on to the next speaker on the panel. There is Mr. Gaurav Sood from Spring Energy. He's here to talk about evolution of role of wind as compared to solar, and how does wind play in the whole hybrid tenders that are coming and likely to come up in the future. So, Mr. Sood, if you could just switch on your camera and introduce yourself, then we'll have a poll following that.
Sure. Hi, Siddharth. Thank you for having me on this panel. So, you know, I would.
मुझे public platform का ही चाहिए.
Sorry for that.
No problem. Yeah. So I was saying I'll give you more of an IPP perspective, how we see, for us, both solar and wind are equally important in terms of technologies where we want to deploy our capital. Finally, we are technology agnostic. You know, just to like from Spring's point of view, we have around 1.75
Gaurav, can we just have a poll?
out of which almost.
Gaurav, can we just? Hi, Gaurav. Can we just have the poll before we go into the comments? So the question is that how much is the audience expecting that wind will support solar and hybrid, or will it be an independent power source? So the voting starts now. Please close the poll, Sangeeta. So 70% people say that wind is expected to move towards hybrid. So over to you, Gaurav.
Sure. Yeah, so I was saying that for us as an IPP in our portfolio, around 50% is wind, 800 megawatt out of our 1.75 gigawatt portfolio, which clearly brings out the importance of having both these technologies. But when you look today from an IPP perspective, you know, I have a very pessimistic view on the wind sector. One key important point is the OEMs itself. We very clearly know that there aren't many reliable OEMs left in the market today whose clear focus is on India as a market. You know, don't get me that players are not there, but you know, we know Suzlon had its own share of issues. Inox has its own share of issues. Senvion, we will see how it emerges in its new avatar. We have, you know, Envision as a new entrant. We have Siemens Gamesa. We have Vestas. Which are there, but again they and GE, which we know, which for all of these last three global companies, India is an important market, but definitely their focus would always be that there are other markets, other geographies, whichever are giving them better profit realization than the India-related volumes get reduced, which is definitely a concern for IPPs because we would want a healthy competition in the market when we are looking for projects. And if there are limited volumes which these companies want to do, then it really can't be true justice for the competition and will not help us to discover the price. That's point one. Yeah. Point two. Also very important, if you see the lowest tariff in the country is 243 Storm Wind Auctions. Rather, it's a project we did with Envision. So we have tariffs of 243. Today we have 280, and now very clearly with the lobbying which has been done, the tariff you know would go up for if we do a pure play wind tender in the range of 3 rupees plus minus. It could go either side. So something, you know, as people have to see what has gone different in the last 2 to 3 years, that your tariff has gone down from 2.5 or 2.43 levels to 3 levels plus. Your commodities have not gone up. Your you know, so something we have to really look at it, because India is a very price sensitive market. We have, you know, I have just joined, maybe someone might have touched upon it earlier, that there is already around 20 gigawatt of tenders which have been bid out, where PPAs, where LOAs have been given, but no power sale agreements are there. And if we are talking about having higher tariffs, God knows when these PSAs are going to be signed and whether they will be signed at all or not. I think you just had a poll that whether solar will play or wind will play an important role. Very clearly, the new tender which has come and the government's direction is, if you do wind standalone, wind will not be able to be sold in the market. You need to blend it with solar, bring the tariffs lower so that so that distribution companies can be pushed to buy this power. So very important, I think, is that the wind OEMs need to really look at how do they bring the LCOE lower. One, of course, is the technology. Very clearly, we all heard about movement towards 3 megawatt, etc. Ideally, it should have started much earlier because I think there was a lot of resistance in moving from a feed-in tariff regime to a bidding regime, which has happened. But still, the way this industry has shaped up over the years, I mean, there are a lot of inefficiencies which are there, which still need to be fleshed out, be it in the production, be it in the BOP, be it how the land is acquired, be how the transmission is done. My very, very honest opinion would be, rather than lobbying all the time, trying to get higher tariffs, I think what would be important is getting or creating an ecosystem in the wind sector where we should talk to government how we can bring transparency in land, evacuation, permits, approvals. Yes. Because the way this industry has shaped over the years, which was earlier, those development was not done in the right manner. That is where the wind industry is still suffering, and will, yes. If it is not addressed, will keep on suffering.
But do you see the hybrid tenders, which have come up, and very oversized wind, and then put solar along with it, and you get a little bit different pricing? Is that the future then for wind?
See, again, it has to be seen. We had one tender, if you're referring to the renewable tender, for example, the RTC tender. First of all, it's not a round-the-clock tender. It is just a high PLF tender.
Yes, high PLF, oversized tender.
We have to really see how many DISCOMs really need that sort of profile. First of all, our off-takers, for example, most of our off-takers do not want power in the night, right? They have a big resistance. They don't need. So really, we have to see what is the true demand of round the clock. When we say, yeah, it's good to be excited that we are able to give round the clock, or let's say a higher PLF, but whether the DISCOMs really are looking for it, at least in today's environment, and especially after COVID, we don't see the demand picking up for another couple of years. And today already every DISCOM says that they are power surplus. When I say power surplus, I mean to say with whatever customers they are catering to. From that point of view, at least they are power surplus, and we are facing a lot of challenges today in getting the PSA signed for the already auction bids.
Thank you.
So that's how I look at it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Sood, for your comments. Now I'll have to move to the next speaker. So our next speaker here is Mr. Christian Halkan, who is from KK Wind Solutions. He's MD and Vice President of India and APAC. And he's going to talk about how cost outs can happen in wind supply chain and how technology happens. KK Wind Solutions is an electronics provider, and this is one of the industries that we saw is not yet localized. And electronics also play a big role in cost of LCOE going forward. So Mr. Halkan, if you just introduce yourself, and then we can have a poll.
Yes, Christian Halkan, as already stated, and I come with a background of 20 years within cement and mining, so it's a little bit off the wind turbine industry, but still it's the same things about cost out of the products, because it's a competing market we're in. Also, we my former company started with an organization of 300 good colleagues in Chennai and grew to 3,000. And I actually like the questions you had before, if the wind turbine industry in India is seen as a hub for Asia. And I truly think this is it, that it's not only about India, it's also utilizing India as a hub for the Asia Pacific region. At least that's the way we see at it in KK Wind Solution.
Okay, Christian, can we have a poll here just on the question that we have here, just before you go into the details? So audience, please vote. The question is, so where do you see the cost out coming? Is it localization of raw material? Is it re-engineering? Is it avoiding import duties by bringing things local? Or is it innovation in electronics? So what's your view? Time starts now. Yeah. Sangeeta, can you close the poll? Okay, so most of the people believe that re-engineering and local raw material and then innovation electronics is the way forward. So over to you, Christian.
So it's more or less a full house for for everything, and I can tell you that localization means a lot to us, and we are working on that because it's also good business for KK Wind Solutions. So it's not only about how to generate jobs; it's a matter of ensuring that the entire value chain is generating profit. And for us, the more we can source, of course, locally, the better it is in terms of not having sea freight things on for 8 or 10 weeks on the sea here. So a lot of focus here from KK Wind Solution is to localize the production, not only the production but also the sourcing of all the products that we have or that we are purchasing here in India, and we have teams working on that, so we can push the OEMs to help us not only have one supplier but several suppliers also, again supporting the competition and driving down the cost.
So how has been your experience, Christian? Because you brought electronics into India, and how has been your experience so far in working in India and being an export hub?
Well, no doubt that we have had our fair share of challenges in terms of getting localizing some of our key components. But it's also good that we have the dialogue, because I think also what I find in the industry that some of the products that they have kept as things they would like to acquire out of Europe or China is sort of a legacy. So as a company, we are challenging the OEMs to say, but these products, they are actually good enough for the purpose they have to serve. So I think that we are seeing also a movement in terms of the openness from the OEMs also to move, because they have also an interest in seeing a global footprint of supply chains. So no doubt that the localization of this is progressing, and something that we have near and dear.
Yes. So, and how do you see the cost out happening for the 2 megawatt platform that is currently very competitive already in India? Do you see scope of cost out from your side of electronics and from the way that you are?
Well, the whole philosophy of the company, I have to say, as a supplier, is we have to do the cost out, and what we are seeing is, of course, the buzzword is the standardization, the modelization, and the scalability. Is the synergies we can see across the different types of turbines that we can modularize, so we can get some scalability into it. So yes, these are some of the things that we are also working on in our company.
And do you see that in India, with this 2 megawatt platform, you can build for India and then also use that to supply outside, or the world has moved to 3 megawatt, 4 megawatt, so in India it has to be for India only?
Well, we are supplier to the OEMs, and of course it's their requirements of need. But as a system provider to them, yes, we can supply also to the 2 megawatts. And of course, then we also have a team of people working on what are the synergies across the 2 and the 3 megawatts. Are there any things we can do, or to have help or facilitate in that shift?
Okay. Thank you, Christian, for your comments. Now I'll move on to the next speaker, Mr. Vipul Jain, who is the CEO of ABJ Drones. And he'll talk about improving wind profitability, because if the costs are going higher going forward, then how do you improve profitability through digitization and AI, especially because of COVID? I think this is a very important topic. So, Mr. Jain, could you come online?
Thank you, Siddharth. Really appreciate. ABJ Drones, we really focus on bringing innovation to renewables. We are based out of New York and London. We work in many different countries. Most of our R&D for last 5-7 years had been based out of Germany. And really the focus is how do we increase the profitability and help improve the, the detection of problems that we have in the wind industry, especially the wind turbines.
So, Mr. Jain, before we go into more details of the issues and the solutions, could we just have the poll, Sangeeta? So how likely is digitization and AI going to be deployed for operating wind assets? So audience, if you can just poll. Sangeeta, you can close the poll. So Mr. Jain, the audience is with you that there is a very high probability of now deploying AI and digitization. So over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. So, so basically, right now, there is a lot of maintenance cost, very high maintenance cost that we have in the wind industry. And a lot of it got to do with the lack of identification of the problems. And the technology so far had been very limited. The size, basically the way I look at it, the size of the wind turbine keeps on increasing. We work offshore, onshore. Offshore, our turbines are now touching like 12 megawatts, 13 megawatts. And the basic design is still the same. So, but these designs, these blades, they take a lot of beating. And that beating in the environment is, leads to a lot of internal problems in the blades, which affect the productivity and the profits from the generation of the electricity. Now, that is what we address and really try to proactively help manage both the OEMs as well as the power producers to really identify those damages, internal damages most of the time, very early on, and then proactively manage them. We very effectively can find now up to 99% of most of the problems that exist, internal or external surface of the blades. And, we saw companies like Siemens, GE, LM, they tried to develop similar solutions, spend millions of dollars doing that, and they could not. And now they partner with us globally to provide and, help them identify these issues. So, so these innovations are happening. We are one of the leaders in that area, both wind, solar, power lines. And we see significant improvements in terms of helping, both power producers as well as maintenance companies and OEMs to really.
So are you seeing, Mr. Jain, are you seeing any traction in India already?
Yeah, we are working in India. We actually, recently went into India about a year back. We work with quite a few companies like Renew and other companies over there. And we are increasing our presence in India quite a bit at this time.
And has COVID changed any of the queries or the kind of queries that you are getting, both the number and the kind?
Yeah, COVID, absolutely logistical problems, and the businesses are rethinking the existence and survivability, and definitely a lot more deployment of drones that we see, and the technologies using drones are very much going to be required going forward. COVID is definitely redefining quite a few things. We as businessmen kind of have to look at.
Got it. Good. So please continue.
Yeah. So so basically, right now these technologies, I was looking. Niharika went through all the different solutions that we have in the wind industry, and I was reading through some of the comments, coming up. The basics, the difference I see between using drones optically or using it thermally. Optically, you are like, basically going to a photo shoot and getting a photo done really doesn't tell you much, as to what the condition of your assets are. But thermally, it's really like, in a healthcare environment, you're going to a radiologist, and radiologist not only has a hardware sensor, but also has a deep understanding of your, body, and can get to the problems with the right angling and things like that, putting a pillow under your leg and things like that. So that's exactly the difference between what we do, using thermal technology to get to those problems and proactively get to them before they become an issue. And that's really what we kind of bring to the wind industry at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jain. Thank you. I think we have also some comments coming in. I think we'll start the question and answer round now, and then we'll come back with some questions. We have received some questions also for you. So I have the first question for Mr. Amar Variawa. So Mr. Variawa, we have received a question that, how is the geopolitical situation today will affect renewable energy? So Mr. Variawa, I think you have left, he's left the conversation. So I think I'll move on to Mr. Sood. So Mr. Sood, the question is that, okay, he's also not there. Okay, Mr. Sood is also not there anymore. So is Ms. Bajaj here? Ms. Bajaj?
Hi, Siddharth. Yes, I am.
Yes. So basically the question is that, it all comes down to the point where we left off. It was around this new innovation finance, innovative financing, and how these new tenders that are coming, do you see a risk in those? Because when it comes to hybrid, these are still untested, and when these projects are oversized, some curtailment risk is passed to the developer. So how do you see that as a risk going forward in financing?
So as a global financer, as mentioned earlier, we are looking forward to finance such projects. We do want to, consider these risks because we believe that is where the future is. So someone has to, take the call and do evaluation and get comfortable with it. So as we were financing the first of the RE projects in India, we are comfortable taking those risks and maybe, establish the market that these projects are viable so that other lenders also come forward to finance them in the future.
So you mean to say that you'll wait for evaluations from, some other players as well?
No, I was saying IFC is comfortable going forward with these. Okay. We have financed such projects in other markets globally, and hence, we are going to go forward and finance these, and that perhaps would convince other lenders to finance these also in the future.
Got it. And but do you see any specific risks coming in these projects? I mean, based on what you have seen so far.
Any new technology, the big risk is, of course, the stabilization period. How long would that be? And how do you evaluate this in detail? So given we have had experience of funding storage, of funding hybrid projects worldwide, so we do have specialists who do consider these risks and also advise developers on what they should do, should not do as they finance these projects.
Got it. So it's very interesting, how this will pan out, because this is going to probably be the main driver going forward. Mr. Jain, the question we have is also from the audience. One of the questions that has come up is that how similar are drone inspections as compared to traditional methods? And what sort of accuracy can you expect from drone technology? And are there any clearances that you require from defense? Because drones seem to be a little bit in between regulation and non-regulation. So first of all, are they accurate? And are there any challenges?
So those are very good questions. First question, how effective are they compared to manual inspection? Manual inspections, first, they take a lot of time and money, and they don't give you the quality of data you need to really find the problems in the wind turbines. Our inspection, the downtime on a turbine is less than 45 minutes, and we get about 100 times better data and quality on the internals, not just the photos, outside photos, but on the internals of what is going on in the turbine. So how effective they are, we test them thoroughly. We have been testing them in Germany, Scotland, Canada, US for quite some time. And we get invited into very complicated problems by Siemens and GE, LM, different manufacturers. We have perfected this technology to a point where we can address each one of those issues. And as these new issues come up, we kind of keep on working on perfecting. And it's not just the technology, it's a lot of techniques involved in it. So you are now looking at, when you talk about thermal technology, it's the heat index. Now, heat index in an outside environment, how do you get that heat index? So when the turbine is spinning, the blades generate a heat, and we enhance that with the sun and other factors that are available to us. And with the right angling of the turbine, with the right piloting techniques, with the right positioning of the the sensors, we really get to those problems and we find those problems. I would say about 99% very effective. Third part around defense and all the issues in India, that had been a challenge, to be very frank, and that kind of limited us to go to India initially. I'd been trying to get in for last 3-4 years, but because of these challenges, kind of holding back a bit. But now, in last 6 to 8 months, we are seeing that open quite a bit. A lot of times we just have to get some permissions, but we are doing quite a few projects in India at this time, and but generally, I just did a project in February near Jaisalmer for Renew, and some of the very close to border areas were an issue, but other places not an issue at all, and so that is happening at this time.
Yes, and with the all reduced manpower, it will definitely improve. Got it.
Absolutely.
Got it. So next question is for Mr. Halkan, which is basically what kind of challenges do you foresee in countries like India and Denmark, for moving from variable renewable energy, which are intermittent, and how can electronics play a role for more grid formation? And is there any sort of view you can give us from your experience how variable renewable energy can become more from using electronics?
Well, I think the whole the way we are collaborating, initiatives like this, where we start gathering the industry and having focus on increasing the renewable energy here, I think this is the right path to go. This is what Denmark is known for. We know that Vestas and Siemens Gamesa, they are situated within a very short distance from our factory in Denmark, and the collaboration and the discussion together with the authorities is the way that brings the renewable energy forward.
Got it.
So meetings like this is to me also part of the journey.
Yes, I agree. I think the sharing of information will help see the potential and then move the industry forward. I agree with you. So, Mr. Gopan, there's also a question coming for you, that is, how is Southeast Asia expected to develop in future, and can India actually supply in Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia? So what's your view on that?
Definitely, if you ask me, the Indian market, we are dealing with these turbines for quite some time, and a lot of components are locally also manufactured, whether it is blade or towers and some generators, even converters. Now KK Wind is also doing the converter here. So that way, and then each market is different, whether it is Vietnam or Bangladesh, or different markets are different. But then the focus should be here that the India has a potential as a hub to manufacture some of the components. We have to go a long way for certain things, but definitely we see that there is an opportunity here which we should look into. We have good people here who can actually work on that, focus on these things, and required investment is required for taking it up forward.
Okay. But I think with this, we would like to close the session. We have overrun the time. I'm sorry for that. I think some of the comments were really interesting, so I didn't want to interrupt the speakers on the flow. But thank you all for joining us for this session. I think it was quite informative. Over to you, Sangeeta.
With this, I would like to close the webinar for today. On behalf of First View Media Ventures Private Limited, I would like to thank all the speakers for joining us, all the attendees for joining us for today's webinar. A special thanks to ABJ Drones for partnering with us. Special thanks to MEC Intelligence for providing their advisory services. With this positive note, we would like to close today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.